Hi, I'm Emma. I'm 29 years old and I come from the sunny city of Sydney, Australia. I grew up in a small house near the coast. My father was a mechanic and my mother worked at a bookstore. Life was peaceful, and growing up, I always had big dreams about the world beyond our neighborhood. When I was in school, I used to watch American movies and imagine myself walking down the streets of New York or Chicago. I would hear people speak English with different accents, fast and confident, and I used to say to myself, one day I will speak like that. In school, we had English classes. I learned grammar. I memorized vocabulary. I even got good grades. I wrote essays, passed exams, and answered questions in class. On paper, I knew English. I thought I was ready for the world. But then, life gave me the real test. 1 year ago, my husband got a great job offer in Chicago. He asked, "Do you want to move to the US?" I said yes without thinking. I was excited. A new country, a new life, and maybe even a new version of me. We packed everything we had. I hugged my parents tightly at the airport. I remember my mother whispering, "Stay strong. You're brave." When I arrived in Chicago, everything felt new. The streets were big, the buildings tall, and the people busy. I looked around with wide eyes and a nervous heart. In the first week, I smiled at everyone. I wanted to make friends. I wanted to belong. But then came the language. I knew English. I thought I did. But the way people spoke here was fast, full of expressions I had never heard. They asked me, "How's it going?" And I didn't know what to say. They said, "What's up?" And I froze. I tried to answer. I tried to smile. But the words felt stuck. In my mind, I knew what I wanted to say. But my mouth didn't listen. Simple things became hard. Ordering food was a challenge. Answering questions made me sweat. Talking to neighbors was scary. I remember one time at the grocery store. The cashier said, "Do you want paper or plastic?" I stared at her. My mind raced. What did she mean? I felt embarrassed. I just nodded. She looked confused. That night, I cried. My husband said, "Don't worry, you're learning." But I didn't feel like I was learning. I felt like I was shrinking. I stopped talking. I avoided people. I used hand gestures. I smiled too much. I felt like I lost my voice. Back in Sydney, I was confident. I worked at a library. I helped people every day. I answered phones. I gave directions. I was not shy. I was not scared. But here in Chicago, I felt like a child. Every time I tried to speak, I worried. What if I say the wrong word? What if they laugh? What if they don't understand me? So I said nothing. That's the strange thing. I knew English, but I couldn't speak it. Speaking is not the same as knowing. That's what I learned. Speaking needs courage. Speaking needs practice. Speaking needs time. I started to realize that I was not alone. I saw other people, from Mexico, from India, from China, all trying to speak. Some spoke slowly. Some used simple words. But they spoke, and I didn't. I started to ask myself, why do I stop? Why do I hold back? The answer was clear. I was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of sounding silly, afraid of judgment. And that fear stopped me every time. Even at home, when I practiced sentences in front of the mirror, I would stop and correct myself. I wanted every word to be perfect, but perfection was my enemy. So I stayed silent. I listened, I nodded, but I didn't speak. And that silence became a habit. A painful habit. That's when I began to understand the real problem. It was not my grammar. It was not my vocabulary. It was my fear. My fear of speaking. I knew I had to change something. Because if I didn't speak, I would never grow. In the first few weeks after I arrived in America, I was filled with energy. Everything felt new, exciting. I wanted to try, to explore, to connect. I thought my English was enough, but I was wrong. One chilly morning, I went into a small coffee shop not far from our apartment. It smelled like warm cinnamon and fresh bread. I remember holding the door open for an old man who smiled at me kindly. That made me feel safe, like maybe people here were friendly. I walked up to the counter. My heart was racing, but I was smiling. I looked at the menu. My eyes jumped from one word to another: latte, espresso, americano, cappuccino. That last word, cappuccino, I knew it. I had practiced it before. So I stepped forward, took a deep breath, and said, "One cap. Cappuccino, please." The girl behind the counter tilted her head. She looked at me, then said, "You mean cappuccino?" She smiled, but her voice sounded sharp. And then she laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't mean. But it was enough. Enough to make me freeze. Enough to make me feel like a little child. Like I had done something wrong just by trying. I forced a smile. My cheeks were burning. I nodded quickly and said, "Yes, that one." She rang up my order and said, "No worries." But I was already shrinking inside. The moment I stepped outside, my eyes filled with tears. Not because of what she said, but because of what I heard inside my own mind. "You can't speak. You sound stupid. You'll embarrass yourself again." That one small mistake felt huge. I walked home with the warm cup in my hand, but a cold feeling in my chest. All I wanted was a simple coffee. All I did was say one word wrong. But it felt like failure, and from that moment, something changed in me. Every time I thought about speaking English after that, my heart beat faster. But not in a good way. I started doubting myself. I would rehearse sentences in my head. "Excuse me, where is the bus stop? Can you help me find this? How much does this cost?" I would practice them quietly, even whisper them to myself. But when the moment came, I would freeze. My voice wouldn't come out. I became a professional at nodding, at smiling, at pretending I understood everything. Sometimes I did, but often I didn't. I stopped asking questions. I avoided conversations. I even let my husband speak for me at stores and doctor visits, not because I couldn't speak, but because I didn't want to feel that feeling again, that feeling of shame. That moment when your words get stuck and someone looks at you like you're different. That moment when you feel small. And you know the worst part? No one told me to stop speaking. I stopped myself. I told myself I wasn't good enough. I told myself I wasn't ready. I told myself I needed more time. But days passed, weeks passed, and still, I stayed quiet. I thought silence was safety. But really, it was a cage. Because deep down, I wanted to speak. I wanted to say what I was thinking. I wanted to share stories, ask questions, laugh, connect, belong. But I couldn't get past the fear of being judged, or worse, misunderstood. Every mistake became a wall. Every strange look became a warning sign. And every time I held my tongue, I built that wall higher. It got to the point where I avoided even eye contact. If someone smiled at me, I looked away. If someone said good morning, I nodded and kept walking. I convinced myself that it was fine, that one day I'd speak perfect English, and then I would talk. But that day never came. Because the more I waited, the harder it got. I didn't know it then, but every time I stopped myself from speaking, I was teaching my brain, don't speak. It's not safe. I was training myself to stay quiet. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more afraid I became. It's like forgetting how to swim. At first you know how, but you're scared of the deep water. Then one day, even shallow water feels risky. That's how it felt with English. Even simple words started to feel too hard. Until one day, something small happened. A moment I didn't expect. A sentence that broke the silence, and that leads me to the next part of my story. What happens when we stop speaking? Because staying quiet doesn't make life easier. It just makes it quieter. And I started to realize, quiet isn't always peace. Sometimes it's loneliness. When we stop speaking English, something inside us also stops growing. We don't just pause a sentence, we pause our progress. We pause our confidence. We pause our dreams. At first, it feels small. You forget a word here and there. You laugh nervously when someone talks too fast. You nod your head even when you didn't understand. You tell yourself, it's okay. Next time, I'll try. But that next time doesn't come. Because you don't feel ready. You don't feel enough. I was there. I remember those early days after moving to America. My ears were full of English, at the bus stop, in the stores, on the radio. But my mouth stayed closed. Why? Because I was scared of making mistakes. I was scared of people laughing. I was scared of sounding stupid. So I stopped speaking. At home, I watched TV in English. I wrote new words in a notebook. I even repeated phrases after YouTube videos. But when it came time to actually talk to someone, I froze. It didn't matter that I knew the grammar. It didn't matter that I had practiced. In real life, my voice just disappeared. That's what happens when we stop speaking English. We don't just lose a word. We lose our courage. We lose practice. And practice is everything. When you stop speaking, your mouth forgets how to move in English. Your tongue gets stiff. Your sentences feel heavy. You think too much. You start translating in your head again. And English, once simple, becomes a mountain. We also miss connection. I remember my neighbor, a kind lady named Judy. Every morning she waved and said, "Good morning." I smiled. I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask, "How are you today?" I wanted to say, "It's cold today, isn't it?" But I didn't. I only smiled. A fake, safe smile. One day, Judy stopped trying, and I stayed alone. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't use them. That's the sad part. We want connection. We want friends. But our fear builds a wall around us, and silence becomes our prison. Then there's confidence. Oh, confidence is a tricky thing. You see, when you speak, even a few words, your heart grows. But when you stop, your heart shrinks. You feel small. You tell yourself things like, "I'm not good at English. My accent is bad. I'll speak later, someday." But someday never comes, because the longer you wait, the more you doubt yourself. The more you stop, the harder it is to start again. I couldn't order food without pointing at the menu. I couldn't ask for help at the train station. I couldn't tell the teacher at my son's school, "He's not feeling well today." I wasn't that I didn't know the words. It was that I didn't trust myself to say them right. And that lack of trust became a heavy silence in my life. Silence at the park. Silence at the store. Silence even at the doctor's office. I felt invisible. Like I didn't belong. And that's when I realized something deeper. I wasn't just afraid of wrong grammar. I was afraid of judgment, of rejection, of being seen as someone who's not smart enough. That fear made me stop, and stopping made me feel powerless. It's not just about learning a language. It's about living a life where you can express your feelings, where you can ask for help, where you can share your thoughts, your real thoughts, with the world. And when you don't speak, you don't just lose words. You lose your voice, your real, living, human voice. But I want to tell you something important now. Even if you stopped, you can start again. Even if your voice is quiet now, it's still there. It's waiting. It's strong. It just needs a chance. I didn't know this back then. I thought I had failed. I thought I would never speak well. But life has its way of teaching us, and it taught me something beautiful, in the smallest, most unexpected way. It happened one morning. Something small, but it changed everything. It was a cold Monday morning. The sky was gray, and the streets were quiet. I remember holding my little boy's hand tightly as we walked to the public library. His fingers were cold, but he was smiling, excited to see the children's section filled with colorful books and toys. We had been in Chicago for 6 months at that time. 6 long months. I hadn't made a single friend. I hadn't had a real conversation with anyone. Not in English. Talked to my son, yes. I talked to my husband when he came home from work. But outside the house, I was silent. And it wasn't because I didn't have words. It was because I didn't have courage. That day, I just wanted to let my son play. I stood in the corner of the library while he crawled into a beanbag chair, flipping through a picture book with dinosaurs. There was a woman nearby, maybe in her 40s, with short blonde hair and a warm green scarf. She looked over at me and smiled. Her eyes were kind. Her smile was not too big, just soft enough to say, "Hi, I see you." I smiled back. Then she walked toward me, and she said, "How old is your son?" My heart started to beat fast. It was a simple question, a question I knew how to answer. I had practiced this in my mind many times. He is 4. That's it. Just 3 words, but still, I froze. My brain started running. What if I say it wrong? What if she doesn't understand me? What if I sound stupid? What if my accent is weird? So many thoughts, all in just 2 seconds. But then, something inside me whispered, "Just try." I took a breath. I looked at her and said slowly, "He is 4." I heard my voice. It was soft, nervous, but real. She smiled even wider. "Oh, nice, he's cute," she said, glancing over at my son. That was it. A normal reply. No correction, no laughter, no judgment. And in that small moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Nothing bad happened. I didn't melt into the floor. She didn't walk away. I didn't make a huge mistake. I just spoke. I stood there for a second longer, watching my son. But I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was thinking about myself. I realized something powerful. The fear was bigger, in my mind, than in real life. That lady's smile stayed with me all day. It wasn't just a smile. It was a mirror, showing me that I could be more than a silent woman in a foreign country. I could talk. I could speak English, even if it wasn't perfect. That night, I told my husband about it. He smiled and said, "See, you did great, but it wasn't about being great. It was about being brave." That moment in the library was small on the outside, but inside me, it was huge. I had waited for months, thinking I needed to be ready before I spoke. I wanted perfect grammar, perfect words, perfect pronunciation. But now I understood. Perfection doesn't come first. Courage does. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom. I looked at myself and whispered, "I will stop stopping. I will start speaking." I repeated it again, louder this time. "I will stop stopping. I will start speaking." I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew I would still feel nervous. I knew I would still make mistakes. But I also knew this. I couldn't go back to being silent, because silence was safe. But silence was also painful. It kept me away from people. It kept me away from learning. It kept me away from living. So from that day, I made a simple promise to myself. I will speak. Slowly, softly, even with mistakes. But I will speak. The next morning, I went to the same coffee shop I always went to. I looked at the girl behind the counter and smiled. When she asked, "What can I get for you?" I answered, not in one word, not in silence, but in a full sentence. "I'd like a cappuccino, please." Did I say it perfectly? I don't know. But she understood me. And that was enough. One day, I went to the library with my little boy. It was a sunny afternoon, and the library was quiet and warm inside. The smell of new books, the soft rustling of pages, and the gentle voices made it feel safe. I wanted my son to love books as much as I did when I was a child. I hoped this place would be a little world where he could learn and play. As we walked through the aisles, my son ran ahead, excited to pick out a new picture book. I followed slowly, watching him smile and point to colorful covers. Then, near the children's section, a kind lady looked up from her book and smiled at me. She had friendly eyes and a warm voice. She said, "How old is your son?" Her question was simple, but suddenly, my throat tightened. I wanted to answer quickly, confidently. The words were easy. "He is 4." I had practiced this sentence many times before, but that day, for some reason, I hesitated. My heart beat fast. I worried my voice would shake. I feared I might forget the words or say them wrong. I paused. The lady waited patiently, her smile never fading. She seemed genuinely interested, kind, and patient. That small kindness made the moment feel less scary. Then, I said it. Slowly, softly. "He is 4. Her smile grew bigger. "Nice. He's cute," she said, looking at my son, who was happily flipping through his book. The moment was short. Just a few seconds of conversation, but to me it was huge. I didn't speak perfectly. My sentence wasn't perfect, and my accent was strong. But I spoke, and something beautiful happened. Nothing bad happened. No one laughed. No one looked down on me. No one ignored me. Just a simple, kind exchange between two people. For so long, I had held back, stopped myself from speaking because of fear. Fear that I would make mistakes. Fear that I wouldn't sound good enough. Fear that people wouldn't understand me, or worse, that they would judge me. That day, in the quiet library with my son, I realized something important. My fear was in my head. The world was not as scary as I thought. I promised myself right then, I will stop stopping. I will start speaking. Because I knew that if I kept stopping myself, I would never improve. I would never grow. I would stay stuck, silent, and lonely. From that moment, every small conversation became a victory. Every hello, every thank you, every how are you was a step forward. And so began the change. Now, I speak slowly, but I speak. Every day, I try to use English. Sometimes I speak in short sentences. Sometimes I mix up words or make mistakes. But I don't worry about being perfect anymore. I know that every word I say is practice. Every sentence I try is a step forward. It hasn't been easy. Some days I still feel nervous. Some days I want to stop. But I remind myself why I started. I remind myself that speaking English is not about being perfect. It's about being brave. I remember how scared I was before, how I stopped myself from speaking. But now I realize that fear only grows when we stay silent, when we hide our voices, when we refuse to try. Confidence comes from doing, from speaking, from making mistakes and learning from them. I want to tell everyone who feels scared like I did, you are not alone. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to speak slowly. What matters is that you try. That you speak your truth, even if your English isn't perfect. Sometimes I feel proud when someone understands me. Sometimes I laugh at my mistakes. Sometimes I get frustrated, but I never give up. I want you to know, don't wait for perfect English. Don't wait for the right moment. Speak your broken English proudly. Speak it bravely. Because broken English is brave English. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Your effort matters. And every time you speak, you get closer to your dreams. Thank you for listening to my story. If you feel scared to speak English, remember, you are brave already. Keep speaking. Keep shining. Thank you for listening to Emma's story. If you ever stop speaking English because of fear or mistakes, remember, you are not alone. Speak a little every day, even if it's not perfect. Please like this video if it helped you. Share your story or questions in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell for more inspiring stories like this. Keep speaking, keep growing. See you soon.